This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Zach Gorchow.
Zach, it's a big holiday week.
That's right, Cheyna. We're recording 2 days before Christmas. Plus, thanks to the vagaries of our favorite lunar calendar, Hanukkah also starts at sundown on Christmas Day. We've got a festive look going from our respective studios. Be sure to check out the podcast on the WDET YouTube channel for some extra fun, like the t-shirt I am wearing and Shayna's sweater.
Plus, we should also mention that 2024 is almost over, which means 2025 is upon us. So in the spirit of being extremely original, we're going to use this episode of MichMash to recap what Zach and I saw as some of the top stories in Michigan government, public policy, and politics. Zach, it's hard to believe how much has happened this year. I mean, there was an election, of course, but just so much more.
So much.
And I feel like the big one was probably the election, but that still feels like it was just yesterday. So actually, let's start off with a story that I'm not gonna lie, I had completely forgotten about until you brought it up, Zach. You know, we've been talking lately a lot about how the Democrats in Michigan have been imploding, but remember when Republicans could not get their stuff together?
Yeah, in a way, I think what played out in the Michigan Republican Party in 2024 is a good subtext for the entire year, and it's in a sense that it captured the arc of the Republican comeback.
So, sprinkling some snow, here's a flashback to a year ago. Christina Karamo was chair of the Michigan Republican Party, and nothing was going well. She was turning against former allies in the party. She had deliberately pushed away longtime party members. Donors had closed their wallets. The party was baroque and in disarray, but party members removed her and put former Congressman Pete Hoekstra in charge.
Pete Hoekstra really saved what was a sinking ship. I feel like you might have just paid him the biggest compliment possible, which is that there was no memory that you had of what had gone wrong at the beginning of the year. He reestablished the party as at least an active presence in campaigns. Some key groundwork was laid to assure that state house Republicans were no longer totally on their own, which they were until he was in charge. He had President-elect Trump's support to become chair, which meant that reestablished communication between Michigan Republican operations and the Trump team. And the party also, again, had a credible voice who could promote its views and candidates to the state.
I mean, you could almost feel the collective exhale from Republican elected officials when Hoekstra took over. And when you look at the successes the Republicans had in the election, Trump winning Michigan, retaking control of the state house, flipping a U.S. House seat. I mean, it's hard not to wonder what would have happened if Karamo had still been in charge.
Now, we should note it is safe to say Hoekstra could not repair all the damage. The party was not a player at all in the race where it's most directly involved, the Michigan Supreme Court, where the party actually nominates the candidates at a convention. Whereas the Democrats had their Supreme Court candidates in place in March, Republicans just battled over their candidates until August and then couldn't fund them. Helped lead to Democrats winning landslides in both races and setting up a 5-2 Democratic majority on the court in January. You know, there just wasn't enough time after Hoekstra became chair in January to sort out the court more quickly and repair donor relationships.
Okay, let's get into what is probably still on everyone's mind, the lame duck insanity. And there's a lot of subtopics and subtopics in this one. But let's start with these sort of, 29-hour Senate session, Zach?
Yes.
I feel like if I was you, I would still be unconscious at this point.
I am sort of conscious, but it's definitely still hungover from that. You know, session started at 10 a.m. on Thursday and effectively went all the way through 3:02 p.m. on Friday, December 20th. So pretty incredible. Essentially what it came down to was the Michigan House, also, I guess we could say nominally controlled by Democrats, fell apart and wasn't able to muster a majority support among Democrats to move forward. And so the Senate Democratic majority made a decision that this was not going to be the epitaph to the Democratic trifecta, just that the House fell apart and the whole works fell apart. And so they passed close to 100 bills, and it was really quite amazing procedural battle with the Republicans trying to delay, make the Democrats stay up late. The Democrats made it clear, we don't care, we're going to push through. The big unknown is they passed so many of these House passed bills, and because of the way the system works, they can't change them to get them to the governor's desk. No changes could be made. So I think as the layers of the onion get peeled back, I'm going to be interested to see how many of these bills really are ready for prime time and fully baked. I don't know how many cliches I can pack in there, but there. Suffice to say, I think there might be some issues with these bills. If the governor signs them, maybe she won't sign them because there's some structural problems. We're going to find out.
Well, what are some of the big topics of bills that they were able to pass? I know that the Democrats had a very long list of things that they wanted to achieve when they got that trifecta 2 years ago. I mean, if we're looking at the totality of what they've been able to do, including this, marathon that the Senate had, what have they gotten done?
Well, there's a couple different ways to look at this. I know the Democrats and certainly the governor are going to say you can't just look at 2024. You've got to look at 2023 and 24 because they did do probably, you could say, a historic amount of large things in 2023. They went in the total opposite direction in 2024 and did not do that. But nonetheless, so we're going to talk about 2024, though. The Senate was able to salvage a few things. They changed the structure in how public bodies handle health insurance for their employees. Employee unions have been agitating that they're getting stuck with a bigger and bigger share of the premium bill. This is going to move that around somewhat and cause school districts, local governments, et cetera, to pick up a bigger share of the tab. That was a big one that moved through late. A big change when it comes to criminal sexual conduct and the statute of limitations, effectively lifting that away. But again, that wasn't the full package of bills. The ones that survivors of sexual assault really wanted got stuck in the House and died. This would have greatly loosened the statute of limitations on civil lawsuits. And those are a couple. I think it's safe to say, though, that the big ticket items that a lot of Democrats really wanted did not escape the Senate, despite the Senate Democrats' best efforts. There were things like driver's licenses for immigrants in the United States without documentation or legal permission to be here. That didn't happen. A whole bunch of bills that would have shifted more responsibility onto businesses to clean up pollution. Those got stuck. Changing workers' compensation, stuck. Probably you could say the biggest single thing, which as we record here on December 23rd, the governor signed today, was to increase unemployment benefits by 70%, the maximum benefit, and the number of weeks someone can receive benefits.
As I've been trying to wrap my head around the calculus behind everything that has been going on these last few weeks, but also this past year, it seems like, as you mentioned, Democrats really jumped into passing things, the big ticket items, the things that they really cared about in 2023. And then it seemed like their thinking was, well, in 2024, there's an election year. We don't want to pass anything that's going to come back to haunt us during the election. So we're going to save everything for after that election. And that feels like, obviously hindsight is 2020, but that seems like such a bad idea because nobody likes to have these marathon sessions. It feels like, at least in my experience, lawmakers start to resent them really quickly. Whatever side they're on, particularly if they're not the side that's in power, they get mad when they feel like things are being rushed through. They don't think that's how this is supposed to get done. And it seems like this year, the Democrats did not bank on their own members taking offense to this strategy. And it seems like they didn't really have a cohesive, figured out strategy in place to handle this lame duck session.
I think that is correct. I think they put all of their chips on the idea of lame duck. And it was, we could call it hindsight, but honestly, a lot of people were telling them as it was happening, this is a huge mistake. You can't push a year's worth of legislative business through the legislature in 3 weeks. You just can't do it from scratch. It'd be one thing if you had, moved the bills through committees, through the house, through one house or the other, and had things teed up in a greater way farther in advance. But that's not what happened here. There was just a massive set of inertia, deliberately so, by the House Democrats. The Speaker of the House, Joe Tate, made a decision. We're going to run on what we did in 2023. We're not going to rock the boat for 2024. And so what that meant was that things slowed to a crawl. The Senate did stay in. The Senate did do some things, but the Senate also was trying to be respectful of Tate and say, okay, the House is up for election. The Senate is not. Let's not go passing a bunch of things that are going to make Tate uncomfortable and asking, why are you putting us in this position? So it just slowed the whole works down. And it left them in, I think, an impossible position come lame duck. I'll give one good example, I think, of a couple. I'll give two that things that could have been done in advance. And guess what? Probably would have helped their candidates running for reelection. We just mentioned the unemployment benefits bill, how that was not passed, say, in May as a standalone event and sent to the governor in a big showy thing. I will never understand. That is a politically popular piece of legislation. You would put the Republicans on the defensive. Instead, it's jammed through after the election when it's irrelevant. The other one I'll mention is moving corrections officers, the corrections officers who work in Michigan prisons, back into a pension system, into the state police pension system. Those corrections officers right now have the equivalent of a 401k, and they're trying to get more people to work in the prisons. You can imagine that's a difficult chore to make it a desirable place to work. Well, the Democrats have a state rep up in Marquette. Her name's Jen Hill, and she was a sponsor of one of these bills. Look, the UP, the prison industry in the UP is like the auto industry downstate. It is big. Tons of people work there. It's politically popular. For reasons, again, I don't understand. Jen Hill's bill, these bills were bottled up until after the election, and only now were passed and queued up to go to the governor. Why those were not passed way in advance to give Jen Hill something to run on, I don't know. And guess what? She lost. She's not coming back next year.
Well, of course, a lot of this probably would not have happened if not for Democrats losing their trifecta. You figure if they had managed to keep the House, they would have had, a few more years to work on all this stuff, and it wouldn't have felt like such a huge push. So let's talk about the election. The Republicans did really well in 2024 in Michigan. Donald Trump won Michigan. Republicans were also able to take a majority in the Michigan House. However, Democrats did get a win by keeping Senator Debbie Stabenow's seat. Democrat Alyssa Slotkin won that. Zach, what do you think were sort of the big takeaways from the 2024 election?
Well, I don't know about you, Cheyna, but if you kind of zoom out 50,000 feet, I think one thing is that presidential election cycles, at least in the Trump era, have suddenly become the good cycle for Republicans. For decades, it was the opposite, where it was the presidential year where Democrats had more success in Michigan, and the midterms where they did not, and Republicans were more successful. That is now totally flipped on its ear. I think we saw quite a bit of evidence of that. I think just that, Democrats are in a pickle right now when it comes to the presidential race and national politics, that they've kind of lost that white, lower middle class base has really shifted so sharply to the Republicans. I think about the I-75 corridor. These are areas that used to vote reliably Democratic and are shifting really quite dramatically to the Republicans. And they lost ground everywhere, though. They didn't do as well in places like Oakland County, where they've been making a lot of gains. So I think it's that these presidential years have suddenly become a challenge, and Democrats are going to have to, look again at what kind of a candidate can do a better job of getting their voters out. But the other thing I would say is that, candidates still matter, that the Republicans did not run the table. We talked about Alyssa Slotkin here, beat Mike Rogers to keep the Stabenow Senate seat, Democratic. Kind of miraculous in some ways that, Trump won the state by about 1.5 points, yet Slotkin ekes it out. It ends up being the closest race in the history of the state by either 3 or 4 tenths of a point, any U.S. Senate race in the history of the state. Kristen McDonald-Rivet won the congressional seat to succeed Dan Kildee up in the Tri-Cities and the Flint area. That's an area that, like I just said, is shifting Republican, but she was able to run, I think, separately from Vice President Harris and establish her own bona fides. So I think there's something there that candidates do matter. Republicans had some really strong candidates for the state house. And it's just Michigan, we know this. Sometimes, we forget it, but it is a purple state. It's really up for grabs every 2 years.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how Democrats and Republicans react to this election in the next election. It seems like a lot of times these political parties will try to overcorrect when they lose, or if they win, they will just sort of rest on their laurels. And I feel like that's part of what happened with Democrats is they were like, we came out real strong in 2022 with the abortion message. And so we can really just keep hampering on that. And, we won previously the presidential race with Joe Biden, based on sort of like, we don't want Donald Trump in the White House. So we'll keep on with that instead of really looking at where people are at and meeting people where they're at with their different issues and what they're concerned about. So I'm curious to see if Democrats learn from that and if they correct in the right way and don't go too far in another direction and then end up alienating a totally different group of people that they need to win elections.
So those are the big topics of 2024, but there was a lot else that went on. So we're going to kind of do a grab bag section now. And we're going to start with the former Speaker of the House, Lee Chatfield. He was the Speaker in the 2019-20 term, gets charged with all kinds of corruption charges. This was one that had been brewing for some time. Charges brought by the Attorney General's office, Dana Nessel. We're in a slow grind with this one, Cheyna.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you obviously know the law. This one looks like it's going to take a long time to play out, doesn't it?
I mean, these types of cases in general, they are want to take a long time, especially because it seems like Nessel is just continuing the investigation. Like, it doesn't seem like the investigation is fully done also at this point, and it seems like there's just a lot to dig into and to go through with this case. I mean, we're going to talk in a little bit about what we're going to be watching for in 2025, and this is definitely one that I will be keeping an eye on in 2025. And I think as far as 2024 goes, I've been kind of surprised that it has not had a bigger impact on the state legislature. I was kind of expecting for there to be, I don't know, some acknowledgement via bills and like transparency legislation or anything like that, just to recognize that like this happened while he was the Speaker of the House. Like, this is a problem. So that I was actually really surprised by that there hasn't really been a whole lot of conversation or discussion about this since those charges dropped.
That's a great point, Cheyna. I think we had an episode in the spring where we sort of talked about, boy, if the Lee Chatfield scandal and some of the other scandals that have broken isn't enough to prompt the legislature to take some real actions, like applying the Freedom of Information Act to itself, doing something to disclose or deal with these nonprofit funds that many of them are linked to and de facto run, but never, they never have to disclose the donors to them. I mean, geez, what could possibly go wrong? Slush funds effectively managed by legislators where they never have to disclose the donors or really any details on how the money is spent. And that's what the Chatfield scandal is really about, was this nonprofit fund he had called the Peninsula Fund. And he basically allegedly, stress the word allegedly, he hasn't been convicted of anything, used it as his own personal piggy bank. And exactly zero actions were taken to deal with this in 2024.
Yeah. Well, another big surprise that happened this year is, well, part of it was surprising The other part of it was not so surprising. Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan announced that he was going to run for governor. Surprising that it's kind of early. But if you read the announcement, you find out that there's an even bigger surprise rather than him running fairly early for the 2026 election, which is that he is running as an independent. Duggan has been a lifelong Democrat, and he says that he is going to run his first race for governor as an independent.
You know, I what a wild morning that was. We
That
were
was
set
a
to
wild
record.
morning.
Yeah, we were set to record on whatever it was we were going to record about. And all of a sudden, the Duggan news breaks. I think we recorded 2 hours after it happened. So
Mm-hmm.
at least now we've had some time to let it sit a little bit. And it's really encouraged the Republicans to think that there's a real opportunity for them here if he goes through with this. And it's also basically caused the Democrats to get their dander up and say, okay, we've got to, we can't screw this up. Now, no Democrats have announced for governor so far, but there've been some interesting little maneuvers. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, put out a tweet a couple hours later, basically saying, I'm a proud Democrat. That was her response. We haven't heard too much from Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist about it. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has been in the state, and people are wondering what he might do. So it's really fascinating. This is just going to be so interesting to see how it plays out.
I can't wait to see what happens with this. Because like I had said when we initially talked about this, if anyone could win on an independent ticket for governor, I do think it's Mike Duggan. He has a lot of the charisma and the power behind him and the name recognition behind him going into it. But whether or not him saying, actually, I'm an independent, despite having, very Democrat led views and having been a Democrat for so long, I'm so curious to see if that works out. Finally, in our little grab bag section, Zach, you had mentioned that you wanted to talk about Governor Gretchen Whitmer and this shift that we have been seeing from her, where she seems to be focusing more on national issues as opposed to local. What were you thinking there?
So I think if you look at Governor Whitmer's 2023, this was a governor who was very focused on what was going on at the Capitol. She gave a policy proposal laden State of the State speech in January, and then followed that with another one, essentially like a State of the State light in August, which was really unusual for a governor. And I think really saw the opportunity here with only the second Democratic trifecta since World War II, to leave a substantial policy legacy. But then when you look at what happened in 2024, Democrats lose their majority in the House for 4 months because they had a couple of vacancies, basically brings the House to a complete halt. I think she must have looked at it and said, there's nothing to be accomplished here. I've got what I need nationally. I'm going to focus on what was at the time the Biden presidential campaign, where she was a national co-chair, and kind of burnishing my brand nationally. She wrote a book called True Gretch, all the kinds of things that someone does when they're looking to broaden their scope nationally. And she just didn't have much of an agenda really for the year. There was, yes, she wanted some economic development legislation, but that felt kind of like yelling into the void, because it was clear the Democratic House was not going to do that based on divisions there. And then she also, talked about road funding again. Well, that wasn't anything new, and she didn't have a new proposal there either. And then what was really interesting when we get to after the election and the lame duck session, and she said, she thought it would be a fairly active lame duck because the House hadn't done very much, but it felt like she got, either a quick sense that this was not going to work out or whatever, but it felt like she just withdrew from the entire process. She was not in the Capitol very much, especially when things ultimately fell apart in the final days. And the one thing that really did not go unnoticed around Lansing was not only the fact she wasn't at the Capitol, but it almost seemed like she was trying to do counter programming. She was putting up social media talking about can't wait for 2025. And, a lot of us were looking around and saying, your Democratic majorities are flailing here at the Capitol trying to finish 2024 before Republicans take control of the House in 2025. What's up with that? you know, putting out things on social media about meeting with dignitaries, doing her year-end interview with Tim Skubik, and there was no acknowledgement that everything was falling apart at the Capitol. And I think she's got a really interesting decision to make for 25, which is she going to re-engage with what's happening at the Capitol in this new era of a Democratic Senate and a Republican House, or is she going to really keep the focus on nationally that she started in 2024? And just kind of let whatever happens at the Capitol happens.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, I do think it was probably the smart move, given how everything worked out at the legislature, to just kind of take a step back. It's very possible that she was like, there is nothing I can do here.
Yeah.
There are lawmakers that are, hanging out in the office of Republicans. So it is probably best for me to just keep my head down and stay out of it, because I think that also will help her with her own constituent, not just constituents, but probably help her maybe with Democratic lawmakers in 2025, as far as like being able to work with them, because she can be like, I didn't get involved in all of that mess. Let's start over. It makes it easier to go into 2025 with a clean slate.
I got the distinct feeling, those of us of a certain age remember the 2007 budget showdowns that involved then Governor Granholm. And there's this infamous photo of her standing next to the Republican leader in the Senate, Majority Leader Mike Bishop at the time, both of them just looking stricken, like they can't believe how bad this is. I got the distinct feeling the people around Governor Whitmer did not want a photo like that to occur.
Yeah. So we'll also be watching for what Governor Gretchen Whitmer does in 2025. But Zach, before we head out and dive headfirst into some Soufgoniot, let's talk about what else we will be watching in 2025. I have already mentioned that we will be obviously watching what goes on with Governor Gretchen Whitmer and her office, also what happens with the Lee Chatfield charges. Another thing that I'm going to be really focused on and zeroed in on is who is announcing for governor. This is just such a wide open seat at this point. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, she cannot run again. She is term limited. And there are just so many options out there between the Republicans and Democrats. And I don't know, I'm not saying that they're all good options, but there seems to be a lot of people that could be hankering for this seat. You already mentioned current Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. I think she has been making a lot of signals that she would like to be running for governor. I'm really curious to see if current Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg decides to run. Garland Gilchrist. The other one that I think is probably a really smart move for Democrats is Mallory McMorrow, who has been a state senator for quite a while now. She kind of made a name for herself a few years ago when she made a speech that went viral on the Senate floor about abortion and women's rights. She might be one to watch. She might be a bit of a dark horse for Democrats.
Yeah, and the other one, I guess I would say wild card, is the Genesee County Sheriff, Chris Swanson. He is sort of running kind of, I'm the, man's man. Wearing the sheriff uniform. I'm tough. Family and I were coming back from a delicious chicken dinner at Zender's last night. And as we re-entered Genesee County from Saginaw County, there was a huge Sheriff Swanson billboard that was there really for no other reason than to promote him. He clearly is very ambitious. A long shot, I think, as a countywide elected official, but he's definitely going to try to make some moves. And then we have some news actually here as we record on December 23rd. On the Republican side, former Attorney General Mike Cox has formed a candidate committee to run for governor. There's been a lot of speculation he was going to make another try. He was Attorney General from 2003 to 2010, and then ran for governor in 2010, but lost in the Republican primary to Rick Snyder. Since then, he's been running a very active legal practice and was really the plaintiff's attorney on the sexual assault litigation involving the University of Michigan with former Dr. Robert Anderson. So really interesting to see him looking to make a comeback. There's a lot of others. How about him, Cheyna?
I feel like for Republicans, I am less aware of who is interested. Obviously, I can initially think of John James, who seems to run every year for something. But he has won he won his Congress seat.
Yeah,
So
he's won it twice now.
Yeah, so it's kind of a, well, is he going to go for it or is he not, given that he seems to have pretty much secured that spot in Congress. The other possibility is that Tudor Dixon, who went up against Governor Gretchen Whitmer last time, makes another run for it. I think she would be an interesting candidate. That being said, I don't know that she has really kept a high enough profile around Michigan to sort of, maintain whatever status that she had as a prior candidate.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. She's clearly interested. She's, continued with this podcast. She continues to use social media and media appearances to talk about what's going on in Michigan politics. I think the interesting thing for her is everything lined up for her in 2022. Half the field got disqualified. She got some key endorsements. They made sure she had enough funding for the primary. And of course, the most important one, Donald Trump. And I think that also is going to be maybe determinative headed into 26, who the president endorses in the primary. So that'll be interesting. You've also got the Senate Minority Leader, Eric Nesbitt. Is, people are kicking his name around, and he hasn't ruled out the idea. Perry Johnson's a gazillionaire. You can never count him out. But yeah, certainly no shortage of possibilities.
Zach, one final thing to watch this upcoming year is Speaker Matt Hall working with Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brinks. I feel like these are two very strong personalities, and I am very curious to see how they are going to work together, because when was the last time we had the power in the House and the Senate different? I feel
2007 to 10. That's probably 2 generations ago at this point.
Yeah, so, it's been a minute.
It's been a long time. And yeah, I think this is the most important relationship in Lansing for the next 2 years, how they are going to work it out. And it's going to get a huge test right away in what happens with these sick time and minimum wage laws that take effect in February. Matt Hall wants to change those, ease them a bit. And that's not the Democrats' cup of tea necessarily, but it appears Senator Brinks is open to some type of negotiation. And that's, instead of the usual 4 to 6 weeks of easing in, that's going to require some immediate action. I thought it was interesting as everything was falling apart last week that both Brinks and Hall issued statements basically, showing, hey, I'm willing to talk with you. Now, that didn't happen. There were just too many things going wrong otherwise. But they were, talking together on the Senate floor at one point. I think Senator Brinks has shown with her relationship with the Senate Minority Leader, Eric Nesbitt, that they can have sharp differences on policy and even on procedure. But there's a respect there between the two of them. And I think, there's a better chance of her and Hall being able to have something of a working relationship than there was with Speaker Tate, who just never seemed willing to give Hall a chance. And, Hall, certainly threw a few grenades around, but, I think Hall did want to work with Tate, and Tate just didn't trust him. So this is the relationship to watch.
So much is probably going to happen in 2025, including things that we haven't talked about or haven't even thought about. And Zach, I am very excited to be covering all of it with you in the new year.
Yes, I'm very excited. I even have a dreidel here that I'm going to spin. Maybe that'll give us a sense of, how the year is going to go. As the show drops today, it is the third night of Hanukkah after all, which is very, very exciting. Thrilled to be doing this with you, Cheyna. Can't wait to get our third co-host back, Alethea Casbin. And hey, the dreidel came up, as it turns out. So you know what? That's good. We'll take it. That means we get half the pot for those of you who don't know. I will take half.
Half is good with me. Well, thanks to all of you, our dear listeners. We are so grateful for you. We hope you have a very safe and relaxing holiday season.
MichMash is produced by WDET, Detroit's NPR station, in collaboration with Gongwer News Service. MichMash is hosted and produced by Cheyna Roth, Alethea Casbin, and me, Zach Gorchow. Additional production and editing by Hernz Laguerre Jr., mixing, mastering, and music by Sam Beaubien.
Our digital team is Sophia Jazwiak and Jenny Sherman, and our news director is Jerome Vaughn. As always, if you listen to this podcast and want to support it, you can do so by leaving us a review or comment wherever you listen. You can subscribe or follow us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, basically wherever you get your podcasts.
MichMash is a great opportunity to get your message out to state and local policymakers in 2025. To learn more about sponsorship, contact me at this handy email address. I am standing by at advertising@gongwer.com.
Remember, we're produced by a public radio station, which means we are listener supported. So if you really, really like this podcast, you can support WDET or gift a sponsorship to a friend by going to wdet.org/give. It makes the perfect last-minute holiday gift. We'll talk to you next week.